let's get rolling then. We'll see if anybody drops in, and if they do, great, and if not, that's fine. All right, hello everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you might be. Hello again. My name is Seth Lippincott. I'm product marketing for SAP LeanIX, and I'm going to be moderating the panel here with our lovely panelists. I'm going to just go around as I have them in clockwise fashion so they can introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll get into some questions that we've prepared. So, Tishya, you are to my counterclockwise direction, so please introduce yourself,
Hi.
who you are.
Yeah. Hi, well, thank you for having me. I'm Tishya Poteet. I'm head of enterprise architecture and services at Western Governors University, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. Greg, you're next on my list here.
All right, thank you, Seth. Welcome all. I'm Greg Robleski. I am Director of Enterprise Architecture at the state of Utah, and soon will be becoming product owner for ServiceNow. So we can talk about that as well. But thank you for joining our session.
Sandeep, you're next.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Seth. I'm Sandeep Nema. I'm head of enterprise architecture here at the Cook County in the Illinois, and looking forward to participate.
Okay, great. So we've got a few questions that we've prepared, but if anybody has any burning questions for the panel that they want to ask, by all means, put them in the chat, and we'll see if we can address them if we still have some time after we've gone through the questions that we've prepared in advance. So without further ado, let's jump into that. So one of the things that I run into a lot with some of the prospects and customers and partners that I talk to on a regular basis is how they communicate the value of EA across their organization. So, Sandeep, let's start with you. What has been your experience in communicating that value within your organization? Are there any sort of best practices that you can offer? What would be your response to that question?
Yeah, so when we work with our stakeholders, like they're like a variation, like sometimes we are talking to our business stakeholder versus technology, delivery, vendor partners. So we start with like caring about like the audience, like what we are supposed to present, and then prepare and like tailored interaction with them. So for example, like when we are working with like a business practice leader or product leader, we focus our conversation more around how we can do the enablement for the work that they are looking. It can be like a pre-discovery on like research on some product, and then looking into like a marketplace, or coming up with like some idea like to do like something like a build versus buy, and then provide like them some kind of a summarized output of that. That helps for when we are working with like our like technology partner from different level, like a product PMO, and then like a more of like a IT delivery area. There we work more into like a approach of like a solutioning a problem, put together like some options, like how easy, medium level, or difficult level we can solution something. What are the benefits, pros and cons? So that gives like a more of an insight, and then help them with the decision making. So that's how I prefer to approach, and then we provide like a more of a kind of an insight, and then they start seeing the value. They see the value. It kind of a building a trust with them. So they see the value, and next time they will come, oh, can you help us do that? So that's what my approach is.
Gotcha. So it's not exactly a business case, but sort of options that they have in terms of how they want to solve a particular problem, and
Yeah,
what they'll be able to realize from that.
right. And then what will add the value at the stage that that initiative is currently in, whether it is like running in more of like a technical delivery, and then we are hitting a roadblock, and that's where our interaction would be different, like more of like giving like a solution approach and options, versus something they are looking like, say, multiple options, like the marketplace, and then thinking, weighing things, whether it can be done in house, whether it is like a build versus buy through like a vendor, or like pick a product off the shelf from the market.
Gotcha. Okay. Tishya, how about you? Same sort of question. In terms of communicating value out to stakeholders, in terms of helping them understand why EA is important to the organization, what do you have any guidance or best practices to offer?
Yeah, so I've learned that although everybody's familiar with the term enterprise architecture, there's usually a lack of understanding of what that means to them. So I usually start by ensuring that they understand what is enterprise architecture and what do we do, meaning align business strategy with the technology execution. And I kind of paint the picture of it's like a Venn diagram of business and product and engineering and operations, and then enterprise architecture kind of covers all those areas and facilitates the collaboration. So once we kind of have a level set of understanding of, well, what can enterprise architecture do? What does that mean? And why does it matter? I find it's helpful to back it up with data and metrics that we might have had. To Sandeep's point, maybe there's a great example of where you realized a significant cost savings because you identified duplicate vendor solutions, for instance, or you minimize the risk footprint because of a particular solution that was implemented, or you significantly increase response time. For instance, in one case, changing a particular software pattern, we increase or decrease response time by 3,000%, giving real tangible results to those who may not necessarily have as deep technical understanding, helps them realize the value that enterprise architecture can bring. So that's where I've found success. One, telling the story and what the heck is enterprise architecture, but also what kind of value can it bring.
Gotcha. You said one word in that I really resonated with me is the collaboration side of things. So the ability of how EAs are positioned within an organization to bring in people to the table to make a decision about how to chart your path forward or what's going to be the next step in X, Y, or Z project, and really hopefully being able to provide insight for every level of stakeholder to help them understand, okay, this is why we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is why we're going to do it, and here's going to be your benefit at the end of the day.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's why enterprise architecture is difficult, right? You have to wear a lot of hats. You're really facilitators, collaborators, initiators with a deep technical understanding. And so it's difficult, but it's the glue that binds everything together. Because if you miss this, then people start working in their own silos.
I think at the same time, and what makes it difficult is also, I mean, I'm curious in any of your reaction to this idea, because so much of my understanding of the history of EA has been sort of ivory tower, making decisions in a vacuum, right? Not necessarily super well communicated, or that in combination with like the sheriff in town who's coming to tell you why you can or can't do something, or why you can and can't use a specific program or application to solve a pain point that you have. So I think that also makes it difficult if there's this perception that decisions are made in a vacuum, they're not made collaboratively, and they're made to inhibit or not necessarily solve the problem the way you would want to. It becomes even more challenging. So the imperative to build consensus is just that much stronger and that much more challenging for you as enterprise architects. I'm curious if any of you have any experience like that, or have had to combat the idea of like, yeah, this is an ivory tower sort of exercise, and we're just here to make your lives more difficult.
Well, I mean, I think in general, much like project management, enterprise architecture has like a theoretical construct, and then it has a more practical construct. And I think the eye of the needle that has to be threaded depends upon your organizational culture, right? Depends on the personalities involved, even more so than the organizational culture. What I found that's worked best for me over the 20 years or so I've been doing this is a more personal, interactive approach. And so let me explain that in 30 seconds or so. Yes, So if we could come in, we could have all our little charts and our little matrices and stuff and say, no, you're not going to be buying Office 365 anymore. You're going to be buying G Suite or whatever. But that kind of gets the cart before the horse, right? I remember one of my first bosses said, people make decisions and people get things done, not charts and email and documents. So when I come into a new situation or even an existing situation, I spend a lot of time trying to establish that rapport. Now, I would bifurcate the world into the dealing with other IT technologists within DTS, where you can be fairly directive, right? Because presumably the CIO or the CTO has said, make this happen, Greg, as opposed to dealing with the business units or the agencies where, as you've all said, it's more collaborative. It has to be a partnership. So, for example, what we've done at the state of Utah and done previously at the University of California is spend the first month or so just sitting and meeting and doing something that we in technology don't do very well, which is asking why questions and shutting up and just listening, right? And over the course of that first month, start to gather data, as Tishya said, and start looking for commonalities, right? Maybe the dean of the business school has the same issue or same concern that the dean of oceanographic studies does. And so in that first month or so, you're just starting to get the environment, sense the environment, identify the sore thumbs, gather data, and then hopefully start to go back to them with saying, this is truly what EA is, and this is how EA can help you in your particular silo. But that's a very silo-based solution. In addition, we try to put in place an architecture review board where we bring in, ideally, top-level executives from each of those constituencies, or failing that, certainly their representative, and trying to use that as a forum to do a couple of things. One, I can talk till I'm blue in the face. That doesn't mean I'm going to convince the business school that EA is a good thing. However, if I'm able to establish the dean of the business school as a stakeholder, as a partner, and as an evangelist, they're going to pay a lot more attention when the dean of the business school or the head of DMV says, yes, we believe in EA, EA can help us, blah, 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 right? So it's really about getting those collaborations. And I know one of the topics we'll get to is, unlike much of IT where we're doing silo or point solutions, EA really does need to take that holistic view. And it really does mean bringing together all of those constituencies and identifying a solution that solves 80% of everyone's concerns and get that dialogue started. So that's what has worked for me. I mean, we have the FAQs, we have the web pages and the downloadable guides and all of that good stuff too. But at the end of the day, I look to try to drive acceptance and adoption of EA through, the agency or department heads.
Gotcha. Okay. Tishya or Sandeep, anything to add in terms of like the education that's required within your organizations and how you go about that? I mean, obviously, technology review boards, if you have them, or are one way of doing it. Are there any other ways in which you've seen effective uses or effective ways of educating a constituency or educating a stakeholder on like the wheres, the whys, the hows, and the whats?
Yeah, the one.
Do you want to go ahead, Sandeep? Yeah.
Right about now, his camera's going to fail.
Yeah, I would be brief, but like the one thing that helped us, like putting together like an engagement model, like that kind of list down like at what stage, what is the architecture engagement that we are developing. So it helps like not just like our stakeholders, but also like my team, at what stage, what and how much we engage and participate in those things. So that way, it's like a more of like a collaboration rather. Sometimes I see like very technical savvy architect, then they can jump into like a lot of things when they are just shown like, okay, this is the problem, just this much, and then they will start like looking into detailed solutioning. And I don't mind doing that, but how much we show to the stakeholder, that is also important.
Gotcha.
I think another important point there is that making people understand the difference between enterprise architects and solution architects.
Exactly.
Right? Because solution architects are much more tangible in their contribution and daily effort. which is what they need to be if they're working with a CDCI team or whatever. But explaining how enterprise architecture plugs together. And fortunately at the state, what we've done is we've tried to unify AI, UX, enterprise architecture, and PMO under one senior vice president. So we have forced collaboration amongst ourselves in the groups that probably will drive a lot of your technology thinking and decisions. And so we kind of achieve consensus amongst ourselves, and then we try to go out as a group to influence and affect the rest of the organizations.
That makes sense. That makes
I
sense.
think we
Then
lost
at
it.
the same
Yeah,
time,
well,
I would say like at the same time, I think we look into like like the problem solving, but like also we showcase like what we are going to do, and then like and then what we will need to do to something, like because sometimes stakeholders like they may come with like say like a problem statement, but you will need like some more information. Like enterprise architecture at the same time, it's not like a magic wand, right, that can do things on its own. That will need like a very close collaboration.
Gotcha. Tishya, welcome back. How about you in terms of education and building consensus with your stakeholders? What has worked for you?
So Gregory and Sandeep have mentioned great things, but the one thing that I learned is helpful that I didn't initially think I needed to do was share the vision and strategy of enterprise architecture with engineering and product and even our business stakeholders. So I thought initially this is probably too technical for them. They don't really need it because it's aligned. Our strategy is aligned to the business strategy or product strategy. But I've learned that the more they understand our strategy and the why behind the how that we're asking them to do, the more they understand, one, when we give recommendations, but two, they're more eager then to proactively engage us. Because one of the biggest challenges that we find is, enterprise architecture should have been engaged and nobody, we weren't aware of this issue. And, we're coming in behind the scenes and now going, we're creating technical debt, for instance, or whatever the case might be.
Oh no, you've been
yeah, it's the buzzword, the bingo card, technical debt.
Take a drink, take a shot.
Yeah. But the more that they're aware of that, usually the more proactively that it gets them starting to think. Because a lot of times strategy isn't aligned. Let's put it that way. So even from a product vision, a lot of times their heads down in executing what a product or a project has asked them to do. And so they're just doing it the way they always knew how to do it. Engineering's doing it the way they always knew how to do it. If they're already aware of this strategy and vision that architecture might have shared with them, they're like, oh, well, this might involve this and this might involve this. So let's pull in architecture. So that's been a big lesson learned for me is share our vision and strategy with them up front.
One thing that I saw today in one of the presentations that was going on is as the presenter was going through his content, skipped over a slide accidentally, but came back to it and said, "Oh, oops, almost forgot this part." And it just happened to be change management, which I thought was actually quite ironic because, of course, change management, the things that gets left out or the thing that's forgotten about. What has been, and Greg, let's start with you. What has been your approach in terms of as you're going through a project, right? So instead of coming in at the end or just at the beginning, doing the continual change management and continual sort of updates, right? So to Tishya's point, if you're going to be, espousing your vision, how have you approached that in terms of it needing to be a continual thing that you do within the organization, within the stakeholders that you're working with, so that everybody stays on the ball and they're all aware of what the sort of next step is, what the next expectation is for them. And if the vision is changing and if the strategy is changing, how and why it's doing that. Because it's not sort of like you invoke the strategy, and then it's done at some point in the future, and it didn't change at all. So, Greg, can we start with you? Sorry, that was a very convoluted question, but I'm just curious in terms of like how you get continuous engagement within your stakeholders to make sure that the vision stays consistent, or the communication with the vision stays consistent.
Well, you're talking about both governance and ongoing education, and then you're also talking about intrusion into the actual projects. So the way we generally do it is, if you follow the TOGAF model, we take it through BDAT, okay? The business process, data, et cetera. And then it's handed off to our PMO. However, an EA representative is on that project steering committee. And obviously, there's if we're doing a 2-week project, no. But if it's a multi-project, like an expansion of ServiceNow or Salesforce, there's a project steering committee, there's an EA representative on it. And so from a governance perspective, or an early warning perspective too, start to see what's going on there. Now, as I mentioned, like we have both solution architects and enterprise architects. So at some point, again, that balance starts to shift more towards the solution architect. But part of our role on the ongoing project is to make sure it stays within the guardrails. Doesn't mean things can't change, circumstances change, vendors are late with upgrades, or people turn over, whatever. To the extent those become architectural issues, we get involved. And if there's a change, so let's say, I'll play my own game. In the world of AI, right? You're constantly looking at this and looking at that. And just because you started out with a particular tool or the particular use of a tool doesn't mean that's what's actually going to be delivered at the end of the day. And so in something like that, if we start to see where that tool, now that we got under the covers, isn't quite what we want, or it's going in a different direction or whatnot, we generally pause the project and take usually about 2-week time frame to bring together not so much the steering committee, but the worker bees, and sit down and figure out, now what does this change? What would this change mean in terms of schedule, in terms of capabilities? For us, it's more about delivery of mission, right, and service, than it is necessarily cost benefit. But all those things, I mean, there's always costs. So we try to do that. Now, in terms of ongoing education, I have been places where, just like you have a once-a-year security recertification you have to do, there's places I've been where you had to, if you're above a manager above, you had to go through EA recertification every year. Not a great fan of that approach, because people treat it probably with the same degree of interest and concern that I treat my defensive driving class that I have to take every 2 years with the state, right? I'd rather have buy-in than forced participation. But it's an ongoing thing, and I think Sandeep and Tishya would agree that proof's in the pudding. I mean, the first 6 months is always tough in a new EA practice, and I was brought in to institute and instill that. Once you start seeing success, if people start seeing the end result, or even better, seeing that they're able to progress through their project faster, better, quicker, whatever, then you start to build credibility, start to build trust, and then you build upon that. But it's not. Rome wasn't built in a day. It's anywhere from 6 to 12 months to establish. My experience has been to establish a well-oiled, well-functioning enterprise architecture. So I didn't answer your question, I don't think, Seth, but I answered the questions I wanted to answer.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah, I'll get us back on the rails a little bit, because what you were mentioning, one thing there, where sort of once you build some credibility, you can sort of get this flywheel moving a little bit. In terms of innovation as a topic that EAs can bring innovation or can help the organization innovate. Tishya, can you speak to sort of what your experience has been as an EA or as the EA practice, being that facilitator of innovation, and how the business has responded to that, how you've been able to do that successfully?
Yeah, the biggest role, I think, for enterprise architecture is being able to connect the dots that others can't see. So the responsibility is on us to not only know what the current architecture looks like, but how to do what's being asked and the multiple ways you could achieve that. and the trade-offs and the risks, as well as be very aware of the emerging technologies that are happening. And so when we're in those strategic conversations with business or product, and they're saying, hey, I'd love to do this, it inevitably comes up with how can you do it and how quickly can you do it and what is it going to cost, right? And those are great questions, but sometimes getting it back on the track of, well, why are we doing this? What's the real benefit, or what's the real problem we're trying to solve? And making sure we're answering those questions, and then coming to the table with a whole bunch of different proposals of how you could achieve the same solution in different timelines with different cost proposals. And architecture's role is to come up with options and connect those dots. A lot of times, business can go, oh my gosh, this is a really big ask. We know this is so complicated. And we may realize it's not that big of a deal. Or the converse, right? They may think something's really simplistic when it's incredibly complex. And so, bottom line, just connecting the dots that others can't see and bringing that information to the table.
I like that. I like that a lot. Sort of to pivot from that, when we're thinking of, how where EA can be best applied, Sandeep, I want to ask you about what your experience has been if you're navigating where the organization wants to apply EA as a practice versus where it's trying to sort of apply EA as a practice, but it's not necessarily the best fit or not necessarily best served for what the organization is trying to accomplish. How have you been able to navigate that? Do you have experience in that or something along those lines?
Yeah, sure. So sometime like you will see like an initiative or like some kind of a like change that is coming on in the workflow. Um, it's always a good to take a look and then apply like a, whether it's like an EA significant item, what EA can do there, what EA doesn't need to get involved. So like have like that criteria. For example, like if we are doing like a more of like an identity and access management solution that is bringing like more of a decentralized application and then putting together like a more of a managed centralized solution, of course it will require like a lot of EA engagement. And then similarly, like if we are establishing like a centralized data platform, bringing like more of a anti-pattern of the peer-to-peer data exchange into like a more of a governance driven data exchange, certainly there we need the EA significant work. But sometimes like there are like uh, initiative or project where we already have like a solution, everybody knows that this is the solution, like they're coming out of like a technical debt, or it's just like changing like a tires on a car, but the architecture is still out there. So in those situations, you need to just take a look and then say, we don't need any architecture involvement. Certainly, like bring it into the architecture review board, take a look, and then say, okay, yeah, we are okay. We just need to be informed. That's all. So I think that's like very important because like usually like enterprise architecture teams are leaner than like delivery and other teams. So you want to focus your energy at the right things where it makes more sense for your team to engage in and then bring more value, uh, like that proposition.
No, that's I like that. I always think back to sort of the classic use cases for EA, at least in terms of how we think about them in LeanIX, right? So like application rationalization, you're doing portfolio management, portfolio assessment, right? Or you're doing governance, you're doing technology risk and compliance, those sorts of sort of classic things, and I imagine it's difficult to fit every sort of project that comes across your desk into one of those silos and have it match one for one so that it's an easy, like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll just use our best practices from an app wrap perspective on this one, and we'll do TRC on this one. Like, it just doesn't necessarily fit as beautifully as we would want it to from a use case definitional perspective. So it makes sense that you would have to kind of go at it do you have a set of like criteria that you use in assessing that, or is it kind of sort of a ad hoc or almost gut feel type of perspective when you're making that assessment on whether a project is best fit for some of the use cases that you might be able to bring value to the organization with?
Yeah, we don't have like any like scripted format, like, do that thing, because each work stream or workflow that comes to the architecture, I consider them as a unique, like unique problem, unique solution, and unique strategy and approach that we have to take. So like that's where I like to keep my team agile. Take a look. Use judgment. Like, apply your um, enterprise architecture intelligence and not artificial intelligence, and then like see, like, what we can do, whether it is just like something um, can be done, like what is already out there, or we need to get involved and like review things. So I think that's very important. Like I would say like that framework has to be very flexible, like when we are qualifying a problem or a workflow, to see what are the qualification criteria there.
See, we have a slightly different perspective. So, unlike Tisha and WGU, we're not coming out with new products, right? It's state government. Rarely do we add a new service or whatnot. And usually, to the extent we add a new service, it's mandated by the legislature or Uncle Sam or whatever. Instead, our focus is on how do we fulfill the existing product set or mission better, right? And so philosophically, you could take two approaches to that. You could take a Six Sigma approach, which is we're just going to make it more efficient, right? Or you could take a more traditional EA view, which is how do we make it more effective? What can we do differently? Almost getting into transformation, right? So the most important thing that we do, or we've done, is map our tech stack, right? We know we're not so good on the business processes, but we know our assets, right? And that gives us a sense to start to do what you talk about. And for us, most use cases are trying to do rationalization, right? Either hardware or software, or try to define our principles, buy versus build, cloud versus on-prem. We have those. But it's mostly about trying to figure out how we can do things more efficiently. And that's so we come down more on the traditional EA side of that. Um, the other thing, and I'm not sure the extent that other folks do this, is when we look for sore thumbs, we look at the incident tickets for sure. And if we start to see commonality or an 80-20 rule around incident tickets, not always that there's a solution there, but it's at least something to do a little deeper dive on and see, is there something there either from a Six Sigma perspective or transformation perspective that we can do to make the end customer, in our case, the citizens, more satisfied with when they interact with the state, right? Because we've all been in the DMV lines, right? Now we try to avoid that kind of situation as much as we can.
So getting a proper assessment of whether you have technical or functional fit with the technology that's being applied to a given solution, right?
Yep.
Ideally, you have that visibility and you have that that mapping. Tisha, anything to add on that front in terms of sort of what your approach is for either when you know that a sort of core principle for EA should be applied to a problem versus when it's something that might fall outside that bounds or not necessarily be something that you as a team need to address for your organization?
Yeah, we currently don't have like a prescriptive framework yet. We're actually working on it because sometimes, like I mentioned, we're not necessarily at the table when they decide whether they need to engage EA or not. And so we're trying to set some criteria, guidelines, like which systems does it touch? Because we know certain systems are problematic. Is it going to introduce a new workflow? Obviously, then certainly enterprise architecture needs to be involved. What kind of volume increase does it bring? And so we have more like we're starting a checklist of like what questions do they need to answer, And then does it translate into should EA be consulted or not? Because there could be, 1,000 projects going on and we only need to be involved in half of those, right? Because a lot of those other ones are very small changes, not big design changes, doesn't impact logic, that kind of stuff. So we're trying to give some guidance, but currently we don't have that yet.
Gotcha. That almost speaks to sort of the last question that I wanted to kind of tackle with this group. And it's about sort of the maturity of your EA practice and your maturity of the organization as it pertains to its usage or acceptance of EA as a practice. Sandeep, I want to start with you just really quickly. How would you rate the maturity of your EA practice and how well the organization is able to take the recommendations or the however you're affecting projects that are involved within your organization in terms of integrating EA into that? And then are there any ways in which you are trying to improve that, make it so that the either maturity of your EA practice or the maturity of your organization as it relates to EA improves and gets better so that you can be more effective in your position?
Yeah, so for our organization, the EA is like a fairly new team that has been, I would say, like maturing. And then if you compare like to the other IT organization, business stakeholder, and other department, they have been there for like long time. So how the engagement and then how we are maturing and how we are helping them, I think that's the key here, because um, like sometimes some organization they use like a more of the vendor implementation partners, and then when they do that, like um, the vendors come and then they focus on the scope of work and that they are supposed to do. But as an enterprise architecture, we are maturing and then looking into like a more of like a holistic view, and then not just like a specific like a one of a problem, but like how that intertwined with like the entire ecosystem of the technology, entire ecosystem of our like digital roadmap and strategy, how we bring that things together. So that's how the approach we are taking, and then we are presenting to our stakeholder. And this year, an excellent value in that, because in essence of like having like a more of a, I would say like a like organization level architecture team, but just like doing like a siloed solutioning, it brings like a very good visibility and then like a thought process that we present, and then it helps like not just with the decision making, but like also with the efficiency, um, putting together like a more efficiently like a success path. So that way I see it like maturing. So it's still like we are like far apart, but we are accelerating very quickly, and it is like they adapted very well and welcomed very well across the organization, because they see the value for any advisory consulting need. They come to us because what is out there, what are the emerging technology out there. Architecture team can do like some research, and then have a like a peer network like this. We can discuss things and then give like a better answer than like just focusing on one technology or another.
Gotcha. Great.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot what you just said, Sandeep. I mean, you're always maturing, you're always learning. My
Yeah.
my goal for our team is we've reached maturity when our partners come to us and ask about how to solve a problem instead of running to their vendor of the week. Sorry, Seth, but try to engage with them before they go out onto the street to look for
Right.
solutions. That's what I would view. My team is now mature. When we're able to do that, and our partners, trust us to work with them on a solution.
Okay. I'm not sure SAP would be considered a vendor of the week, but maybe maybe LeanIX is.
No, we run Concourse, so we have an investment in SAP.
And Tishya, I mean, I'm curious in terms of your experience, in terms of like what you're doing to help the maturity of your organization and your own practice to further the goals that you have in helping your organization.
Yeah, the big thing was to make sure we're aligned on OKRs so that we know what data to capture and what metrics to measure success by. Whereas I think in the past, it's been very more like a feeling. Do we think EA is bringing value? And that would vary based upon the person that you talk to, right? So we really need to come back to how are we helping the broader organization from the top down throughout all the other teams like engineering, like infrastructure, like security, achieve their OKRs and deliver on our own OKRs and back that with data. So that is a big thing for us. And then to your point, getting the visibility into what exists today, like the business processes, map to the technology solutions with the current technology stack and the phased approach to our target state. And communicating that vision and what that looks like to people. People are very visual. People get it when you show them a picture. So even from a business person, you showing them a visual flow of what their business process is, and that's related to technology, they get it then they can see why there's complexity in the process change that they're proposing, or they understand why it's going to be incredibly expensive to move from this target state to this target state. And so those are two really big pieces we've focused on.
It's funny you mentioned the visuals. We've literally had customers who have come back to us and said we got executive buy-in to purchase LeanIX because they liked the visuals, and that was all they needed. They didn't need to know about anything else in terms of how it worked under the hood or how it helped their organization. Like the visuals, that was enough for them to sign off on it.
Yeah, pictures make sense, right?
Yeah.
Powerful.
The one thing I like about like LeanIX, like you start from like your business capability, bring your application portfolio, and then you can connect all the way to your ITSM, like pinpoint like a server technology, what version of things you're running. So it is like one single pane of glass. Like you can, as much as you can keep diving, click, 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 you have everything available. Right?
I didn't ask him to say that for the record. So I didn't ask him to say that.
It's a
any
great
any
tie
enterprise
back.
enterprise architecture management tool, but I am using it. So
Yeah.
I think you're going to get the free Linux poster here now pretty soon.
Yeah, we'll have to make sure that you have some swag behind you. Real quick, we have 3 minutes left, and we have mostly avoided any mention of AI. But I have to sort of go into that. I wouldn't be doing my job, I don't think, if we didn't get into it. So one by one, Tisha, let's start with you. Your organization's approach to AI, how it's evolving, where do you think it's going for your own organization? Do you think it's actually going to achieve value at any point in the near future? Where would it achieve value in terms of the near future?
It's going to transform how we do business at WGU, from employees to our users, which are students. So that's to answer that, it will transform how things are operating today. The biggest place where we see it transforming is personalization of education or feeding people options or support based upon their particular profile, their history, any other data we have on them. So that's the big area that we're focusing on right now. What are we considering when we talk about AI here? It's the data. It all hinges on the data. What's the cleanliness of our data? How is it organized? Where does it exist? What are the sources of truth of the data? Where do we go to, or what do we need to do to get it to a place where we need for whether it's our own models internally or vendor solutions to effectively use it and us to plug it in. And then finally, as you guys know, the evolution of the AI solutions, particularly the frameworks like MCP and A2A, are evolving incredibly quick, but they have some very serious security concerns, which means that if we're going to implement those today, we need to figure out how to ensure that the data is secure. So data quality and data security are big things we're looking at.
Nice. Greg?
I'd say clearly in citizen servicing, we talked. I mentioned DMV earlier. Shrinking that line at the DMV, and we view AI as we're talking about augmenting our employees with AI, not replacing them with AI. I think the more interesting topic for us in a few years is going to be we're a state, so we're fairly traditional and gone through the traditional IT history, right? Gone from lots of independently built applications to off the shelf to now platforms, and now we're starting to see requests come in from agencies saying, "Oh, I can go spend $500,000 to buy X from Y." Or, I can go buy this I can go get ChatGPT and they can write code for me in 2 days at a cost of like $20,000. So please, please, please approve this and let's move forward. Right? So I think how we wrestle with that over the next few years is going to be key. Because I don't think we all want to go back to the world where people would be extracting data from a data warehouse, sticking it into a Excel spreadsheet, and then making business decisions based on what comes out of their spreadsheet, as opposed to what the enterprise solution might suggest otherwise. So I would say AI code generation. We call it self-coding. What we have to do with that over the next few years, and how we, as Tishya mentioned, security issues, bias issues, all of those things are important for us. All we have to do is use a model to deny somebody their unemployment or their OSHA claim incorrectly, and then we get sued, and game over.
There's real world consequences. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Sandeep, we are over time, but please, I want to hear your answer on this as well, so we can round.
Yeah, I will just add a few quick points here. So we are more looking into our internal workforce efficiency, taking a workflow and then see where we can uh, fast track things which are more repetitive. That's one thing. Adding more of a self service help, adding more of a looking to add a chat bot for internal service desk, help desk, those kind of things. But certainly before we expose it to our any external facing thing, we will be certainly looking very carefully regulatory needs and then compliance, data security, and all those things. So we are kind of taking first initial steps to test it out, vet it out internally, and then move into more of external facing interfaces.
Great. Well, Tishya, Greg, Sandeep, thank you so much for all the insights. I hope our audience enjoyed them. I certainly did. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you all very much. And Philip, over to you for your closing remarks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.